The folder landed on the hospital table with a soft slap. My mother-in-law sat across from me in a beige blazer, her purse tucked neatly beside her chair, like we were discussing paint colors and not my 7-year-old daughter lying down the hall, waiting for surgery. My father-in-law folded his hands. My sister-in-law looked at her phone. The man in the suit clicked his pen. "We'll pay," Mirabelle said. "But first, you need to sign." I stared at the papers on the table. Outside the room, nurses moved fast under fluorescent lights. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped in a steady little rhythm that sounded too much like a clock counting down. My husband, Soren, had been gone for 11 hours. My daughter, Bryony, was still alive. That was the only sentence I could hold in my mind without completely falling apart. And somewhere in that folder, somewhere between the words transfer and waiver and ownership, was the price they had decided my daughter's life was worth. I picked up the pen. Mirabelle's face softened. She thought she had won. She had no idea what I had already done. "My name is Marlowe. I am 34 years old. I run a small logistics company that my husband Soren and I built from a single leased van and a shared spreadsheet. We had 7 employees, a modest office on the east side of the city, and a 5-year plan that included a second location and, eventually, a college fund for Bryony. Soren was the kind of man who remembered birthdays without being reminded and kept a spare umbrella in his car for other people. He coached Bryony's soccer team, even though he had never played a single game of soccer in his life. He learned the rules from YouTube videos at midnight and never told her that. We were not wealthy, but we were building something real. Soren's parents, Mirabelle and Prescott, had never fully approved of me. I was too independent, Mirabelle once told a relative loud enough for me to hear. Too focused on the business, not the kind of woman who knew when to step back. I had smiled and passed the salad bowl. Sabine, Soren's younger sister, was cut from the same cloth. Polished. Watchful. The kind of person who asked questions that weren't really questions. But we made it work, the way families do, carefully, quietly, and with a great deal of selective memory. Then, on a Tuesday morning in March, everything broke open at once. Soren left early for a site visit. The roads were wet. A truck ran a red light at the Delmore Avenue intersection. He was gone before I reached the hospital. And Bryony, my Bryony, who had been in the back seat because I asked Soren to drop her at school on his way, was airlifted to the pediatric trauma unit with a fractured skull and internal bleeding that the surgeon described in words I heard but could not process. She was alive. That was the sentence I kept returning to. She was alive and the specialist team could operate, and she had a real chance if they could take her into surgery within the next few hours. Then came the number, the deposit, the deadline. The way a hospital can smell like antiseptic and fear at the same time while someone explains, gently, that time is also a bill. I tried our personal bank account first. Frozen. Flagged pending a state review because Soren's name was on it and the death certificate hadn't processed yet. I tried the business account. Restricted. Same reason. I called the bank from a plastic chair beneath a hand-washing poster, my voice completely flat because I had used up every other version of it in the last 4 hours. "My husband passed this morning," I said. "I need access to our accounts." The woman on the phone sounded genuinely sorry, the kind of sorry that lives right next to policy and cannot move past it. "We'll need the death certificate and probate documentation before we can release the funds. My daughter needs surgery today." "I understand, ma'am. I'm so sorry. But I cannot override the hold without the documentation." I sat there for a moment with the phone against my ear, listening to hold music that had no business existing in a world where this was happening. Policy. That single word was sitting between me and my child. I called 2 friends. One was between jobs. One was already helping with funeral arrangements she had started organizing without being asked, because that is the kind of friend she was. Neither could cover a surgical deposit on short notice. I called our accountant. He was working on it, he said. But these things took time. Time. Everyone kept mentioning time like it was something I had. When Mirabelle and Prescott arrived at the hospital, I felt something release in my chest. Not relief, exactly. More like the desperate, irrational hope that family would look at their granddaughter through the ICU glass and simply say, "Of course." Whatever she needs. We'll sort everything else later. Mirabelle touched my shoulder with 2 careful fingers. Oh, Marlowe, she breathed. It sounded like sympathy. It felt like an assessment. Prescott asked about next steps, with his hands folded in front of him, like he was chairing a quarterly review and not standing in a pediatric ICU. Sabine stood just behind them with her coat still on and her expression arranged into something that looked like concern if you didn't look too closely. Can you cover the deposit? I asked. Just until our accounts unlock. I'll sign whatever I need to sign to guarantee repayment. I just need her in surgery. Mirabelle did not say yes. She did not say no. She looked at Prescott. Prescott looked at Sabine. And something cold moved through that hallway before a single word was spoken. We need to think through this carefully, Prescott said. Think. I repeated the word like it was in a foreign language. We want to help, Mirabelle said. We just need a moment. So I waited. 30 minutes. 45. An hour and 10 minutes. I sat beside Bryony's bed and held her small hand and watched the tape that held a tube gently against her cheek. I whispered, I've got you, baby. Over and over, even though I had no money moving and no paperwork cleared and no actual plan beyond the next 60 seconds. Then Mirabelle appeared in the doorway. Come with us, she said. Not please. Not can we talk for a moment. Just come. The conference room was small and too bright. 2 plastic chairs facing a scratch table, a framed beach photo on the wall, a palm tree against a blue sky, as if someone believed that was the image a person needed while their life was being dismantled. Mirabelle sat across from me, Prescott beside her, Sabine near the door, and the man in the suit, who I had not seen before and whose name I was never given, sat at the end of the table with a folder in front of him and a pen already uncapped. Mirabelle's voice went soft the way it did when she wanted something. We're going to take care of it, she said. The deposit. All of it. You don't need to worry. I exhaled. Thank you. But we need you to sign a few things first. The suited man opened the folder and slid the first page toward me. I looked down. Property transfer agreement. I looked at the second page. Business ownership assignment. Third page. Vehicle title waiver. I sat very still. This is the house, I said. Yes, Mirabelle said. And the company. It just makes sense to have things in order, Prescott said. Soren is gone. These assets need proper management. We're not taking anything. We're protecting it. You're asking me to sign over everything Soren and I built, while our daughter is waiting for surgery. Sabine tilted her head slightly. We're helping you, Marlowe. That's what this is. I stared at the pages. The words were clear. Transfer, assignment, waiver, ownership. These were not hospital forms. These were not reimbursement agreements. These were documents that, once signed, would move my house, my business, and my car into Mirabelle and Prescott's names while I sat in a hospital with nothing. I excused myself. I walked to the hallway, pressed my forehead against the cold wall, and called Fiona. Fiona had been my friend since college. She was also a contract attorney, and when she answered on the second ring, I could hear her keyboard stop mid-sentence. I told her what was in the folder. 5 seconds of silence. Marlowe, do not sign those documents. Then how do I get Bryony into surgery? There may be another way. We can try an emergency medical lien, a bridge. How long does that take? Another pause. I don't know. Hours. Maybe more. I looked down the hallway toward the room where my daughter was waiting. Okay, I said quietly. Marlowe, I'll call you back. I went back into the conference room. Mirabelle's eyes moved to my face the moment I walked in, reading it the way she always did. Looking for weakness. Looking for the moment I would fold. Are you ready? She asked. I sat down. If I sign, I said, the deposit moves immediately? Today? Before the end of the hour? The moment the ink is dry, Mirabelle said. Prescott sat back slightly, as if a tension he'd been holding had just released. Sabine's expression didn't change, but something in her shoulders settled. The suited man slid the pen toward me across the table. And in that moment, I understood something with perfect clarity. They were not panicking. They were not destroyed by grief the way I was. They had not arrived at this hospital as family. They had arrived with leverage. They had watched the doors close around me, the frozen accounts, the restricted business funds, the ticking clock, and they had decided that the price of my daughter's chance at survival was everything Soren and I had built together. They had brought a lawyer. They had brought a folder. They had waited an hour and 10 minutes while I sat beside a 7-year-old in the ICU. They had planned this. I picked up the pen. Mirabelle's face softened immediately, that particular softness that meant satisfaction, not kindness. "You're doing the right thing," she whispered. I signed the first page. The second. The third. My name looked strange on the lines, like it belonged to a woman standing just outside her own body, watching from a small distance. The clock on the wall kept ticking. The beach photo kept smiling. The suited man kept turning pages. When the last signature dried, Mirabelle gathered the documents the way you gather something you have been waiting a long time to hold. Prescott exhaled. Sabine looked up from her phone and smiled, small, sharp, and satisfied. I pushed the pen back across the table. "Pay it," I said. And I walked out. What Mirabelle and Prescott did not know, what I had never mentioned, not once, in 7 years of carefully managed family dinners and holiday visits, was that Soren and I had a very specific conversation 3 years ago. It started because of his parents. Not a fight. Not a confrontation. Just a quiet Tuesday evening when Soren came home from a family dinner looking like he had been carrying something heavy all the way back from his childhood. He sat at the kitchen table. He said, "I need to tell you something about my family." And over the next 2 hours, he told me things I had suspected but never had confirmed. The way Prescott had handled his grandmother's estate. The pressure applied to a cousin who had inherited a small property. The pattern, slow, patient, and always timed to a moment of vulnerability. "They wait," Soren said. "That's the thing. They wait until you're too tired to fight. Then they move." We were quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to protect us." And so we built something into the company, quietly, carefully, with Fiona's help, that we never discussed outside of that kitchen. A clause. A specific, legally documented clause buried inside the business partnership agreement and cross-referenced in the property deed. It stated, in precise legal language, that any transfer of ownership executed under documented circumstances of medical duress, defined as the signing party being under active financial pressure related to an ongoing medical emergency involving an immediate family member, was subject to mandatory review and could be rendered voidable at the signing party's discretion within 90 days. Soren had called it our insurance policy. He had signed it with a blue pen at the kitchen table, and Fiona had notarized it, and we had filed it so quietly that it was simply part of the business records, 43 pages in, exactly where no one would look unless they already knew it was there. I had known it was there. I had thought about it in the conference room while Mirabelle watched me sign. I had thought about it when Sabine smiled. I had thought about it when the suited man turned the last page. And I had thought, look closer. The deposit cleared within 30 minutes of the final signature. Bryony went into surgery. I sat in a waiting room chair and held a paper cup of coffee I didn't drink and watched the clock and did the only thing available to me, which was breathe. 2 hours and 40 minutes later, the surgeon came through the double doors. She sat down across from me. "She did beautifully," she said. "We expect a full recovery." I put the paper cup down very carefully on the side table. And then I pressed both hands over my face and cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to cry since the moment they told me about Soren, the kind of crying that isn't grief or fear anymore but something releasing, something that had been holding every other thing in place finally letting go. Bryony was going to be okay. Everything else could be handled. And I already knew exactly how. I called Fiona that evening, from a chair pulled close to Bryony's recovery bed, my daughter's small hand warm and slack in mine, her chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm that was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "They signed," I told Fiona. "Which means they accepted the transfer under the terms it was executed," she said. "Which means the clause is now active." "Yes." "Marlowe." Her voice was careful. "Are you sure you want to move forward with this?" "They brought a lawyer to the hospital," I said. while Soren's daughter was waiting for surgery. They made me choose between my child and everything we built. They sat there and smiled when I signed. Fiona was quiet for a moment. "I'll file the review petition in the morning," she said. "Thank you. Get some sleep." I looked at Bryony. "I will," I said. Eventually, the petition went in on a Thursday. Fiona had documented everything, the timeline of the accounts being frozen, the hospital records confirming Bryony's emergency status, the conference room meeting, the timestamps on the signed documents, and the original clause from the business partnership agreement, cross-referenced with the property deed exactly as Soren and I had written it. The suited man, whose name turned out to be a contract attorney Prescott had retained 2 weeks earlier, before the accident, before any of it, received the filing on Friday morning. Fiona told me later that he called her within the hour. She said his voice had a very particular quality. The quality of someone who has just realized the document they were handed was not what they believed it to be. He asked her to clarify the clause. She clarified it. He asked if there was room for negotiation. She told him the 90-day review window was already open and that her client intended to exercise it in full. He did not call back. Mirabelle called me on Saturday. I let it go to voicemail. She called again Sunday. And Monday. On Tuesday, I listened to the messages. The first one was measured, a careful, reasonable voice asking if we could talk, suggesting there had been a misunderstanding, using the word family 4 times in 90 seconds. The second one was less measured. The third one did not mention family at all. I saved all 3 and forwarded them to Fiona. Prescott sent a letter through their attorney on Wednesday. It proposed that the transfer be maintained, but that I retain a minority stake in the company, a generous offer, the letter said, given the circumstances. Fiona responded with 2 sentences. The first sentence referenced the medical duress clause. The second sentence referenced the filing date. There was no third sentence. Their attorney did not respond. The review period concluded 6 weeks later. The transfer was voided. The house returned to my name. The company returned to my name. The car title, which they had apparently not gotten around to processing, was quietly dropped. Mirabelle did not attend the legal resolution meeting. Prescott sent their attorney, who sat across from Fiona and me with an expression so carefully neutral it must have taken some effort to maintain. He slid a single document across the table. It was a release, a formal acknowledgement that the transfer had been voided and that no further claims would be pursued. I read every line. Then I signed it. With the same pen, the same steady hand. My name looked like mine again. There was one more thing. The hospital deposit, the amount Mirabelle and Prescott had transferred to cover Bryony's surgery, was, under the terms of the voided transfer, reclassified as a loan from the moment the transfer was reversed. Fiona had structured it that way deliberately. A documented loan, with a standard repayment schedule that I had already arranged to cover through the business account that was, by then, fully accessible and operational. I paid it back in full, every cent, because I did not want a single thing from them that I had not chosen to accept. The last payment cleared on a Friday afternoon. I sent Mirabelle a message that evening. No explanation, no anger, no list of everything they had done and everything it had cost me. Just 3 words. Paid in full. She did not respond. Bryony came home on a Thursday, 12 days after surgery, wearing a small white bandage above her left ear and carrying a stuffed rabbit the nurses had given her that she named, with absolute confidence, Captain Carrots. She walked through the front door of our house, and immediately asked if we could have pancakes for dinner. I said yes. I made them with blueberries, which she arranged into a face on top of the stack with the focused attention of someone doing important work. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, our kitchen table, and watched her eat and talk about Captain Carrots and whether rabbits could be astronauts, and I thought about Soren. I thought about a Tuesday evening 3 years ago and a conversation at this same table and a man who had loved us both enough to build something into the paperwork just in case. He had known his family. He had known what waiting looked like. And he had made sure that when the moment came, when the folder landed on the hospital table and the pen was pushed across and everything was on the line, I would not be standing there alone. I never told Bryony what happened in that conference room. She is 7 years old. She knows that some people love you and some people show up when it is convenient for them, and she knows this because children understand things the way they understand everything, by watching what the adults around them actually do. Someday I will tell her the rest. I will tell her that her father built her a shield before he left. I will tell her that she is the reason I signed. And I will tell her that when someone mistakes your desperation for surrender, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let them. For now, she is eating pancakes and asking if Captain Carrots needs a seatbelt in the car. I tell her yes, absolutely. Every time. If someone used the worst moment of your life to take everything you had built, would you have seen it coming? Tell me in the comments below.